The fundamental architecture of the global system is undergoing a seismic restructuring, a tectonic shift that the vast majority of market participants and casual observers are entirely unprepared for. For over 7 decades, the global economy has operated under the assumption of an unshakable constant, the unipolar supremacy of the United States and the unquestioned dominance of the US dollar as the world's primary reserve currency. We have been living through what many scholars assumed was the end of history, a period where Western liberal democracy and its accompanying financial plumbing were the final perfected forms of human economic and political organization. But history has returned with a vengeance. The illusion of permanence is precisely that, an illusion. When we analyze the current geopolitical landscape through the lens of long-cycle theory and structural realism, it becomes glaringly obvious that we are in the late stages of a hegemonic transition. The structural constraints that Kenneth Waltz famously outlined in his theory of defensive realism are forcing nations to adapt to a changing distribution of power. States are fundamentally driven by survival, and in an era where the primary medium of global exchange has been weaponized, reliance on the US dollar is increasingly viewed by sovereign actors as a direct threat to their national security. This is not a theoretical exercise. It is the practical reality of our time. The inevitable consequence of this realization is the systematic dismantling of the dollar's monopoly, a process of de-dollarization that is accelerating by the day. And when this system finally reaches its breaking point, the financial devastation for those holding paper wealth tied to the old order will be unprecedented. Today, we are going to examine the geopolitical realities driving this transition and, more importantly, detail the 5 tangible assets you must strategically position yourself in before the dollar system fractures. To understand why this is happening, we must look at the foundation of the current order. Charles Kindleberger's hegemonic stability theory posits that a stable international economic system requires a single dominant power to establish and enforce the rules, act as a lender of last resort, and maintain an open market for distressed goods. For decades, the United States fulfilled this role. However, as Robert Gilpin brilliantly argued in his work on the political economy of international relations, a hegemon inevitably faces a declining marginal return on its power. The costs of maintaining the empire eventually outstrip the economic base supporting it. The United States has transitioned from being the world's greatest creditor nation to its greatest debtor, funding its structural deficits through the exorbitant privilege of printing the world's reserve currency. This system worked as long as the rest of the world trusted the hegemon to act as a neutral arbiter of the global financial system. But the Rubicon was crossed in 2022. By weaponizing the SWIFT system and freezing the sovereign foreign exchange reserves of a major nuclear power, the architects of Western foreign policy unwittingly destroyed the foundational trust required for a fiat reserve currency to function. Henry Farrell and Abraham Newman have astutely described this phenomenon as weaponized interdependence, where the central nodes of global networks are leveraged to coerce adversaries. But the fatal flaw in weaponizing interdependence is that it instantly incentivizes the rest of the world to build alternative networks. The global South, observing the freezing of assets, realized collectively that if they step out of line with Washington's foreign policy dictates, their national wealth could be zeroed out with a keystroke. This realization is the primary catalyst for the rapid expansion of the BRICS coalition and the development of alternative payment architectures like the cross-border interbank payment system and Project M-Bridge. We are witnessing a reversion to a multipolar world order, one that aligns much closer with John Mearsheimer's offensive realism, where great powers relentlessly seek to maximize their share of world power to ensure their survival in an anarchic system. In this anarchic system, fiat currency, which is ultimately a debt instrument backed only by the political stability and military reach of the issuing government, is no longer deemed a safe store of value. The world is pivoting back to absolute gains, to hard assets, to commodities, and to tangible wealth that cannot be sanctioned, frozen, or inflated away. The era of financialization, where wealth was generated through complex derivatives and debt leveraging, is giving way to an era of realpolitik and real resources. The first, and perhaps most critical, asset you must own in this transitioning world order is physical gold. This is not about speculation. This is about understanding the historical role of gold as the ultimate Tier 1 reserve asset of the global financial system. When the Bretton Woods Agreement established the post-war financial order in 1944, the dollar was anchored to gold. When Richard Nixon severed that link in 1971, the world embarked on a purely fiat experiment that is now mathematically unraveling under the weight of insurmountable global debt. Gold is the only financial asset that is not simultaneously someone else's liability. It carries no counterparty risk. From a geopolitical perspective, we only need to observe the actions of sovereign states rather than listen to their rhetoric. The central banks of the world, particularly those in the Eurasian heartland, China, Russia, India, have been accumulating physical gold at a record pace. They are engaging in what classical realists would recognize as state survival behavior, securing their economic base against external coercion. By hoarding gold, these nations are quietly building the foundation for a new, commodity-backed financial architecture. They understand that when the fiat debt spiral reaches its terminal phase, gold will be used to recollateralize the system. In a world characterized by geopolitical distrust and the fracturing of complex interdependence, gold serves as the only universally recognized politically neutral mechanism of exchange and store of value. You must adopt the posture of a central bank. Holding physical gold outside of the traditional banking system protects your wealth from bail-ins, capital controls, and the hyperinflationary policies that will inevitably be deployed to manage the sovereign debt crisis. The second asset you must aggressively accumulate is silver. While gold acts as the foundational monetary anchor of central banks, silver occupies a unique dual role in the global economy that makes it highly asymmetric in its potential upside. Silver is both a historical monetary metal and a critical industrial component, and it is at the intersection of these two realities that its immense value lies. Geopolitically, we are in the midst of a massive state-sponsored transition toward electrification and green energy technologies. This transition is not merely about environmentalism, it is a strategic imperative for great powers seeking energy independence and technological supremacy. Solar panels, electric vehicles, advanced electronics, and military-grade technological applications all require significant and irreplaceable quantities of physical silver. The world is currently running structural deficits in silver production, meaning we are consuming more silver industrially than we are pulling out of the ground. When you combine this relentless, inelastic industrial demand with a sudden reawakening of silver's historical role as a monetary safe haven during currency crises, the supply-demand dynamics become explosive. Furthermore, in a localized breakdown of financial networks or in scenarios of severe capital controls, silver provides a highly divisible, universally recognized medium of exchange for daily transactions, whereas gold's high value per ounce makes it less practical for smaller, immediate needs. By owning physical silver, you are simultaneously positioning yourself as a beneficiary of the unavoidable global energy transition and securing a vital hedge against fiat currency debasement. If you are finding this geopolitical analysis valuable and want to stay ahead of the structural shifts that are reshaping our global reality, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video. The algorithm favors engagement, and your support allows us to continue providing deep dive strategic analysis free from mainstream media narratives. Also, I am very interested in seeing how diverse our community is becoming. Please leave a comment below telling me from which country and city you are watching this right now. Understanding where our audience is located helps me contextualize how these global financial shifts are impacting different regions in real time. The third asset class you must secure is strategic energy commodities, either physically if possible, or through ownership of the primary producers operating outside of Western hegemonic control. For the past 50 years, the cornerstone of US dollar dominance has been the petrodollar system. Engineered in the 1970s, this arrangement ensured that global oil trades were settled exclusively in US dollars, creating an artificial perpetual demand for the currency and allowing the United States to export its inflation. However, the geopolitical bedrock of this system, the security guarantee provided to Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states, is fracturing. The recent diplomatic rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, brokered entirely by Beijing, signaled a monumental shift in Middle Eastern geopolitics. It demonstrated that the United States is no longer the sole indispensable power broker in the region. As Immanuel Wallerstein's world systems theory suggests, the core is losing its absolute control over the periphery. We are now seeing the rise of the petro-yuan and the settlement of massive hydrocarbon trades in local currencies. The US-Iran conflict dynamics over the past decades have only accelerated this process, pushing targeted nations out of the dollar sphere and forcing them to create parallel financial architectures, therefore gaining exposure to the physical lifeblood of the global economy. Oil, natural gas, and increasingly uranium, is essential. As the world fragments into competing geopolitical blocs, securing energy supply chains will become the primary objective of statecraft. Sir Halford Mackinder's famous heartland theory emphasized the strategic importance of controlling the Eurasian landmass and its resources. The nations that control the flow of energy control the levers of global power. By owning strategic energy assets, or equities in producers located in politically friendly jurisdictions, you align your portfolio with the absolute non-negotiable physical needs of human civilization, insulating yourself from the collapse of purely paper-driven financial markets. The fourth imperative asset to own is productive agricultural land or investments tied to vital agricultural supply chains. Food security is the ultimate form of national security. Throughout history, empires have not fallen solely due to military defeat, but often due to the collapse of their agricultural base and the subsequent social unrest. The modern globalized food system is incredibly fragile, optimized for just-in-time delivery and heavily reliant on complex, energy-intensive inputs like fertilizers, the raw materials for which are highly concentrated in specific geopolitical regions, namely Russia, Belarus, and China. When supply chains fracture due to sanctions, conflict, or currency wars, the cost of food production skyrockets. We are entering a period of Malthusian pressures exacerbated by structural geopolitical conflicts. In a multipolar world where trust is entirely degraded, nations will resort to export bans, resource nationalism, and autarkic policies to protect their domestic populations, exactly as neo-mercantilist theories would predict. A fiat currency can be printed into infinity, but you cannot print a calorie. The ownership of arable land, access to fresh water, and the means of food production represent the most fundamental layer of human survival. In an environment where the purchasing power of the dollar is collapsing, the value of the assets that produce what human beings must consume every single day to survive will reprice exponentially. Whether it is direct ownership of rural land, or equity in agricultural technology, fertilizer production, and critical farming infrastructure, positioning your capital in the mechanisms of sustenance is a non-negotiable pillar of wealth preservation in the coming decade. The fifth and final asset class involves carefully selected emerging market equities and physical infrastructure investments within the growing multipolar sphere. The Western financial system is heavily weighted toward technology monopolies, financial services, and an economy based on consumption and debt. Conversely, the rising economic bloc, centered around the expanded BRICS and the Belt and Road Initiative, is focused on industrial capacity, resource extraction, and hard infrastructure. They are building the physical plumbing of the new global economy: ports, rail networks, energy pipelines, and independent telecommunications grids. This represents a massive divergence in capital allocation. As the dollar crashes and capital seeks safety from Western financial repression, we will witness a historic rotation of wealth out of the hyper-financialized, overvalued equities of the core and into the productive, deeply undervalued hard assets of the rising powers. This requires a profound psychological shift for investors accustomed to the unipolar era. You must look beyond the borders of the declining hegemon. While the risks of expropriation and geopolitical instability are ever present in emerging markets, the greater risk is keeping all of your capital trapped within a dying currency regime. By strategically allocating resources into the industrial giants, the commodity producers, and the infrastructure developers of the Global South and the Eurasian corridor, you are effectively shorting the old unipolar order and going long on the architects of the new multipolar reality. In conclusion, the transition we are living through is not an anomaly. It is the predictable historical cycle of rising and falling empires. The weaponization of the global financial system was a fatal strategic overreach that has accelerated the demise of the US dollar's hegemony. We are returning to a world where power is measured not by the ability to issue fiat debt, but by the control of industrial capacity, energy reserves, and hard monetary assets. Graham Allison's concept of the Thucydides trap warns us of the severe turbulence that occurs when a rising power threatens to displace an established ruling power. During such periods of intense geopolitical friction, paper wealth can evaporate overnight. The 5 assets we have discussed, physical gold, physical silver, strategic energy resources, productive agricultural land, and hard infrastructure in the multipolar sphere, are not just investment recommendations. They are the essential tools of economic survival in a structurally shifting world. They represent a fundamental return to reality, a rejection of the illusion of perpetual fiat prosperity. The timeline for the ultimate fracture of the dollar system is impossible to predict with absolute precision, but the trajectory is mathematically and geopolitically undeniable. The time to prepare is not when the panic begins, but right now, while the window of opportunity remains open. You must decouple your financial destiny from the sinking ship of the old unipolar order and anchor yourself to the hard, tangible realities of the new world.